Welcome back to the Responsible Raw Materials podcast, where we explore the ideas, people, and forces shaping the future of how we produce, finance, and use the materials the world depends on. Today's episode is a particularly important one because it tackles a question that sits right at the heart of the transition we're all talking about. And that is, where does the real power for change actually sit? And to explore that, I am joined by the fantastic John Howchin. John brings a fascinating and slightly unconventional perspective to this space. He started his career not in finance, but in engineering and sustainability, growing up in a world shaped by heavy industry, but also the natural world in Sweden. A pivotal moment early in his career led him to a realization: if you want to drive change at scale, you have to understand and engage with the world of capital. That insight has shaped the last 25 years of his work. In this conversation, we explore how the institutional investment community, pension funds, asset managers, and the so called owners of the corporate world have quietly become one of the most powerful forces influencing corporate behaviour globally. We talk about the early days of sustainability in the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, when concepts like carbon reporting, environmental indicators, and human rights policies were far from mainstream and often met with resistance. John shares first-hand insight into how those ideas were introduced, how companies reacted, and how, over time, they became embedded as standard business practice. We also dive into the role of investors in driving change, not through simply divesting companies, but through engagement, through stewardship, through using their position as long term owners to push companies to improve. And importantly, we bring this back to raw materials. From early work on human rights and mining operations, to benchmarking industry performance, to engaging directly with companies on environmental and social issues, John has seen how the sector has evolved over decades. But he's also very clear: while progress has been made, the scale of what lies ahead is enormous. We talk about the reality of what the energy transition actually requires: hundreds of new mines, many in complex and sensitive regions, and the tension between environmental ambition and material demand. And perhaps most importantly, we explore what needs to happen next. From the idea of creating a global level playing field, to simplifying how we measure and manage sustainability, to unlocking what he calls patient capital for early stage mining projects. This is a conversation that goes beyond theory and into practical, systemic change. It's thoughtful, candid, and at times deliberately provocative. I hope you enjoy it. So, I'm with John in very sunny Riyadh. But rather than me introduce you, John, who are you and what makes you tick?
So my name is John Howchin. I'm predominantly Swedish, but born to an Australian father and a Swedish mother. You know the combination, the usual one. Um, Grew up in Swiss engineering company ABB in Västerås outside Stockholm, heavy industry. My father was in the steel industry from Australia. Um, Started engaging on sustainability in the mid 1980s, a very long time ago. Was doing electrical engineering in high school, which everybody did when you work for ABB. Came back from a long trip all around the world, especially in China in the early 1990s, and told my mother I wasn't going to do electrical engineering. I was going to do sustainability and responsibility. And she said, John, you're never going to get a job. But that's been fine. It's been a long ride. It's been a fascinating ride. I came back to ABB in the late 90s, helping them with implementing ISO 14001 across the company. Was asked by the leadership group what I was going to do. I needed to do my master thesis, and I did it on corporate indicators, on sustainability indicators, and on raw data. And I stumbled across the Institutional Investment Society, the group. There was one Storebrand, an asset manager, that was doing a best-in-class sustainability portfolio on the global leading companies, and ABB wanted to be part of that. And I sort of said, oh, So the money has the power. There's leverage in finance. I didn't know much about finance. I have no finance background. But if you can't beat them, let's join them.
And so when was this approximately, John?
So this is 1998. So I finished my thesis. I thanked ABB, and I left to start a small startup called Green Index.
So finance, when did you make that shift?
So at ABB, who were very good to me, and I do give a big shout out to ABB, brilliant company already back then, and so we met. We were at the meeting where Storebrand Asset Management, which is a Norwegian investor, they were doing a best-in-class portfolio in 1998, sort of the socially responsible investment, which was called then. But this was going to be the best sustainability companies in the world, and ABB wanted to be part of that. And you could see that was the first time management, the sustainability management at ABB, which was already then quite a unique setup to have that kind of management. But they were nervous.
Yeah.
And I could sort of sense, oh, money.
Why were they nervous?
Because everybody's competitive.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to win. That's part of capitalism. You love it or hate it, but it's part of capitalism. And they wanted to be perceived as really good. They've spent a lot of money, time, resources, good, honest people trying to do their best. And they want to be. And I was thinking, oh, I love this. I love this. There's leverage in finance. And I didn't get that before. But then I understood the power of money. And that was a big aha moment. And I decided, no, I'm not going to stay with ABB. I'm going to join finance. And I had no clue about finance.
Yeah.
But I was going to join finance.
So you mentioned the power of money.
Yeah.
What is that power?
So basically, the conclusion is pretty simple. The institutional investment community, asset manager, asset owners, they own a large part of the corporate world. They are the long-term owners of the corporate world. Better like it or not, but that's the reality. And we know our BlackRocks and Vanguards and what have you. But they also represent the people I've been representing, the national pension funds of Sweden, Norwegian oil fund, Adam Matthews and the English Church of England Pension Board. They are also represented by the large asset managers, where the asset owners have a lot of money. So, but the reality is you have approximately, I would say, about 50,000 listed companies in the world, and it's owned by you and me.
Yeah.
The future and the current retirees on this planet. It's our collective money. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but that's the reality. So basically, you could say it's partly sort of a global democracy in a way, if you look at it, if you want to look at it that way. And I think what we're seeing, what we're hearing from the far right against globalists and globalization and all that, that's also criticism against this whole concept, which isn't a concept, it's just reality. Yeah. So I think everybody should be mindful of that. Having said that, I think a lot of my NGO friends, because I used to belong to, they have sometimes a very simplistic view on that. Just sell, just leave that company, which is seldom the solution because there's so much capital out there.
So is that kind of, okay, so if you're an investor and you have a stake in a certain organization that you think isn't doing the right thing, then you just divest?
So I'll go back to my so Storebrand.
Yeah.
That was a stock picking fund. They were picking the leaders and putting the leaders into a fund. And I thought, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing with. The reality was I ended up working for the asset owners, and they have index-based funds where they have 5,000 companies. They are the universal owners. They own everything. So Norges Bank, which is the biggest pension fund in the world, they have 10,000 investments. So I could invest, I could use stewardship on basically any listed company in the world if I wanted to. So I was engaging with Chinese energy companies on coal plants in 2005. You can engage with any company in the world, anywhere, when you work for them.
And did it make a difference? Did you see change?
So back to my experience, where we were late 1990s and early 2000s, we were just sort of starting to work on standards, on policies, on implementation of human rights policies, corruption policies. ISO 14001 and other environmental policies, climate data.
Mhm.
There was a lot of structural work to be done in the early 2000s. I would say even a lot further into the 2010s, 15s, depending on which industry you're working with. There was also a lot of early adaptation on electrifying as much as you possibly could. But once again, the prices on solar batteries and wind weren't that competitive.
Mhm.
And I think many companies had a high ambition very early on decarbonizing, but there was a practical
Mm.
issue on that to be done. But then you had, and as you know, especially from where this podcast is, we had all these issues,
Yeah.
all these what we called incidents. So we'd started working with sort of an incident radar system in 2001 together with the AP funds, where we were basically scanning the world for incidents, NGO reports of human rights abuses, environmental,
Mm.
crackdowns all over the world, and we were engaging. We were engaging using stewardship leverage, engaging all over the planet on all kind of human rights abuses,
Mhm.
environmental accidents, what have you. And it was called the global norms engagement profile. And if you weren't happy about the results or the outcomes or the response from the company, you excluded the company from the portfolio. And that is still sort of a basic procedure for many large asset owners and asset managers.
Yeah.
And that standard was set 25 years ago.
Yeah. So you mentioned carbon. When did you start doing stuff with carbon?
So my first stop after Storebrand was that a couple of people in Stockholm had started the Folksam Climate Change Index over the Stockholm Stock Exchange. So they were asking, it was actually an environmental index. We were asking all the listed companies on the Stockholm Stock Exchange with the leverage of Folksam, which was a big owner
Mhm.
and insurer on the Stockholm Stock Exchange, and a financial paper in Stockholm called the Financial Paper, but that's also leverage. They were publishing all the data. So we were asking them for core data on carbon,
Mhm.
water, uh, biodiversity, and ozone depleting chemicals.
And why were you asking them for that information?
So once again, this was a quality indicator for well-managed companies. And secondly, really importantly, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody was still expecting the Kyoto Protocol
Mm.
to come in function. So it was, even though people were really pissed off at me and they were screaming at me because they were, what are we going to do with this? And I said, look, the river is already running. If you don't manage your carbon data, this is going to be problematic. But that was also a basic pitch that there's going to be a price on carbon.
Mhm.
And we were working with the European Union and the European Commission. She was Swedish, Margot Wallström then, and there was going to be a price mechanism coming up in Europe. So you could also say you need to prepare for this. It's
Mhm.
not only, you're not doing it only for do-gooding. You're preparing for regulation coming your way.
Yeah. And so then by asking companies for that information, did you see them begin to change, or did some of them say, "No, this is a load of rubbish, I'm gonna walk away," or was the
No,
money too exciting?
no. I think we had front page news on the biggest newspapers in Sweden saying, Swedish companies are rubbish. They don't know anything about sustainability, and big corporate names. And I know there were board meetings the day after that. There were board meetings, and they said, "Look, we need to hire people." You got to remember, we take it so for granted, but we were fighting for every head of sustainability at every company, first in Sweden and then in the world,
Mm.
since 25 years back. And now we have head of sustainability. We have sustainability groups at every company. But we've been fighting a hard fight to get them there.
Yeah.
And I keep reminding them, don't. That's why I always say stay sharp, because don't take this for granted. It's been a long walk to get everybody in place, and we have plenty of work to do.
Absolutely. And that was obviously, we're referring to all kinds of different companies, lots of different sectors. But what about mining and raw materials and the general provision of the materials that we need, be it for technology or just living life? When did you get involved in all of that?
So there's no secret. My Australian side is a BHP side. My whole Wollongong family is BHP. So I grew up, even though it was the steel side, because that's what you have in Wollongong. It's now Blue Scope steel. It's not BHP anymore. But so I've had mining all along since I was basically born, and I know mining going way back. Back to when we started scanning the world on incidents, obviously a lot of mining issues came up. Cerrejón, when Cerrejón was taken over by BHP, Anglo American, and Glencore in 2006, there was a possibility on a review to do a review on the human rights abuses that had occurred when Exxon had started the mine. Back to my anxiousness of all these legacy issues I'm afraid we're getting now if we don't get the right people in an early stage of all the exploratory processes ongoing, because we know the legacy issues doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
And you have to be really smart initially in the initial phase. So that was one, and then we had a really long engagement with Goldcorp and the Marlin mine in Guatemala, where I had left and I'd started working for the Council on Ethics for the Swedish National Pension Funds. I was made Secretary General of that. And we did a very early, I think it maybe was the first sort of human rights due diligence procedure on that mine, together with on common ground and together with a few Canadian investors. And I think that was really good. It sort of sent a signal that, hey, investors are prepared to take the responsibility, the owners of this. Obviously, that was a very challenging mine in hindsight, but it doesn't matter. It was really important for the investment community to see that this is actually stuff we can get involved with. And after that, we did a wider engagement with the mining industry. I actually used the ICMM indicators to benchmark other mining companies outside ICMM to see whether they were doing, and that was quite an interesting procedure because you found a lot of gaps on policy and implementation, stuff like that. And we made indicators of that. We disclosed indicators, and then we did a follow-up a couple of years later, and they had improved. Because basically it's not rocket science. I did quantum physics at university. That is complicated. This is not very complicated. And you don't need to shame people that much, because everybody knows where the wind is blowing. But this is 15, 20 years ago. And I think if you look in hindsight now, I think many companies are happy that they actually got started, even though a lot of people were angry and, oh, why are you hassling us on these issues? The financials of many of these things are pretty straightforward now. You know that, and getting to sort of to build into your backbone, and this is the way we operate. And this is part of who we are, which I think, even though headwinds are blowing today, and especially from the US, and you have a much more traditional, rougher capitalism being portrayed as the only capitalism, whereas I am a big believer in responsible capitalism. I'm not going to say sustainable because I don't think that's not right, but I'm a big believer in responsible capitalism. Every company that's been with us here in Riyadh today, or 99% of them, will say we're never going to leave these because it's part of our backbone today, and we know it's sound and smart business for everyone.
Well, exactly. And I think that almost goes back to what you were saying back in the 90s about this. This wasn't about ticking a box or hugging a tree. This was good business and an indicator of a management team that is actually running their business in a robust way.
And I think most importantly, let's be honest, majority of these are bright, smart people. We're educated people, we're intelligent people, we're intelligent humans. Even though I occasionally find one or two CEOs who are a bit too hard and pushing all the buttons too hard, trying to increase his bonus or compensate his small whatever, then you find them every the majority of these people are really, really intelligent, focused, hardworking people. They know what intelligence looks like. This is not that complicated. So I must say, we've come a long way, which is great because we have a huge challenge ahead of us. And that's why I ended my presentation here. Stay sharp. It's as simple as that. We need to really stay sharp because we've got a lot of work to do. We've only started.
So we need to stay awake, not relax and get complacent. In terms of some of this challenge that we have ahead of us, can you describe it?
Yeah, but I think, look, I mean, coming from ABB, coming from Sweden, which is highly electrified, where we have a very low carbon electricity system. I mean, we are moving. This century belonged to electrification. We know that.
Mm.
It belongs to avoiding the worst part of, hopefully, the worst part of climate change. And I still belong stupidly optimistic about that, but it's going to be a challenge.
Mhm.
But the reality is, if 10 billion people are going to grow in the direction we've grown, and that basically the whole machine that we've set up, global capitalistic machine, is geared towards that. You might hate it, you might love it, but it's just reality. It's so huge. I've seen so many parts of it over the last 25 years. It's just unfathomable how big it is.
Mhm.
And there's a global competition. We all know that. There's so much fight for jobs, good jobs, for returns on investment and all that. So it's going to be challenging, and we need. The Investor Commission on Mining 2030. We've just made a report. We were looking at maybe 300, 400 new mines. That's just a ballpark, and we're talking big mines. And unfortunately, our estimation, or what it looks like, many of them will be on indigenous land,
Mhm.
which we all know is very challenging.
Mhm.
It will impact communities all around the world.
Mhm.
We know that's very complicated. Nobody wants this in the backyard. This is still a very weak point for the mining industry, let's be honest, even though I think sort of the groups working on social engagement have really the quality of those groups have really increased. But once again, many of these projects are started by smaller exploration companies, and they don't have those resources, which is a concern for me personally. I'm really worried about that. So so anyone who will tell you, and then we have my friends in the NGO community who's like, many NGOs are still fighting every mine. You know, every mine is a battle. No, we're not going to have a mine. And I'm like, well, are you guys working for ExxonMobil? Because I think somewhere along the line we need to decide, what do we believe in,
Mhm.
and that doesn't mean I'm a huge fan of mines. The environmental side of me and the social side of me, I know all the complexities. I would love to avoid the mines,
Mm.
but we're going to be 10 billion people, and a lot of people need. You still have energy poverty on this planet, like
Mhm.
700, 800 million people, a billion people that hasn't got access to electricity as we speak. I think that's horrible. I think that,
Mhm.
so the opportunity is huge. Solar, this is the solar century. Solar is already changing this planet. Solar is going to be humongous. It's going to change our production systems. It's going to change our industries in so many ways we can't fathom. And that's going to be really challenging for Northern Europe, because we're Germany, Sweden, the UK. We've traditionally been accustomed to having low energy prices to compete with,
Yeah.
but that's going to be difficult now, because you already see Spain is booming
Mhm.
because they've got access to solar and battery and wind, and they've done really well. So because industry needs to move now, because energy prices are going up in Northern Europe.
Mhm.
And I think you look at Sweden, they're struggling. Are we going to build new nuclear? And it turns out that new nuclear, and we know that from the UK and from Finland and from the US, it's really expensive.
Yeah.
And and all these issues obviously also cause a lot of social uncertainty, and the far right is playing on that. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of noise out there, which I think many people find very complicated,
Mhm.
which is fair enough. I know, but the world is changing, and that's going to be a challenge as well. It already is a challenge.
So, what do we need to do? Or what do different groups of people ideally need to do?
So I think something we've touched upon. Uh, I'm a big believer in a level playing field, which means we've had really high expectations on the listed company community for a long time now. I think the institutional investment group that we sort of built the principles for responsible investment, 5,000 investors, They've been pressuring the listed company community a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is there is competition in the market. So you can only raise them to a certain limit. And then you start reaching, I wouldn't say a roof, but I think for many, the cost benefit sort of tangles off a bit.
Mm.
They have to be mindful from Chinese competition, from other non-listed competition. So you got to be mindful about it. And you need to raise the global level playing field now. And people have always told me, oh, it's so complicated. And I've always said, no, it's not really that complicated.
It's not quantum physics.
No, it's not quantum physics. It's not really that. And I think people like you and me, and a lot of us have been doing this for a long time. I think if we kill a few darlings, which I think we do, and we take it a step back and simplify it, and then we put that simplified framework down in every mine,
Mm-hmm.
every production unit. You can add, I've been looking into blockchain or stuff like that. You add hard, basic data, standardized from everywhere, and then we build upwards.
Mm-hmm.
We start at the bottom and we build upwards, so we get good data from every mining site in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who wants. If you don't want to be a part, well, then we can tell the supply chain and the value chain don't participate with these players. So there's still a lot to do on global databases, that doesn't need to be that complicated as a starting point.
Yeah.
We can't start with the Rolex. We need to start with the really, really simple watch and then build upwards. But I'm a big believer in that, and I think we're heading in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's often one of the debates. I mean, it does break my heart where every time I see a sustainability panel or session like this and people start by talking about standards. And I think, no, this isn't about standards. This is about action and performance and doing something. But I guess the kind of pervading debate is, if we lower that standard, then are we giving permission to people with lower expectations? But I don't think that's what you're saying. I think you're saying measure the important stuff.
I think back to my previous point, I think the companies that we've all been working with the last 20, 25, 30 years, you see they've hired really good people. Not all of them, but many of them hired. Even the mining companies I've been fighting the most, when I go there these days, I meet seriously trustworthy people whom I trust, whom I know are doing good work, and who I know the owners and the board haven't trusted to do proper work, otherwise they wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And many of these people get criticized because they joined the bad guys. But how else are we going to do this? I mean, so and that's happened. And I think the challenge we have now is access to that knowledge. Like I said previously, to exploration companies, early stage mining companies. So they need to access patient capital, who are prepared to stay with them, who are prepared to pay that little extra, where you can do at least some basically very good responsibility, sustainability standards within that starting phase, which is so important for the social license to operate with mining, the community engagement, a decently good environmental impact assessment, water assessment, all the basics that we all know, and which all of them actually, the majority I've met so far when I'm running around in Africa, they want to do that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to get that extra funding.
Yeah.
It is I'm a bit worried that a lot of this stuff that we've been doing is still caught up in the ivory towers,
Yeah.
far away from that new reality. So I'm going to spend time on trying to bring it down to the ground as much as possible. And I know a lot of other good people I work with are trying to do the same thing. It'd be great. I'm talking to the World Bank whether we can get small local banks in Africa to get access to specific mining capital with specific demands on that. And if we can get that kind of system up and running, like in Africa, it'd be brilliant to start building that local ecosystem of ownership and investment and responsible investment. So stuff like that, if we could get that, I'm naively optimistic and think we can do that. Even though we have corruption and everything else, I'm completely aware of that. But I think there's opportunity all around. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that, as you say, that patient capital, or that capital willing to come into the world of mining, has almost been one of the blockers, until now. And I mean, you've just given us one area of solution. Are there other things that can be done on the investment side, or what can the world of mining do to try and attract investors who otherwise might have them on the high risk, don't touch list?
I think unfortunately it's that's why we set up the Investor Mining 2030 Commission. Adam Matthews and Church of England Pension Board doing an excellent job in leading that, because it's important that we understand what reality looks like. I do think, to be honest, the pendulum is swinging back. It was raised on one of the panels yesterday that, you know, the 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 stock market is has increased quite dramatically. You know, the share prices have doubled or tripled over the last couple of years. You'd be a fool not to look at it.
Okay.
So
So just from cold, hard financial indicators, you would go, we probably should consider investing in a gold mining company.
they probably already have. But I think for sort of the majority of the big sort of more traditional investors who were before Trump came in and sort of made that pushback and threatening the whole collective endeavor.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's still sort of many of them are still sort of searching around on their responsibilities and ownership, and there's some really great teams out there doing some excellent work, but sort of the collective endeavor has been pushed back a bit because there's something called acting in concert that
Mhm.
Trump and his people have been pushing back at, which was never meant to be against the institutional investment community. It was meant to be another part of the investment sphere. But okay, that's I think that's just a sign of how powerful this whole movement has become.
Yeah.
And I think, quite honestly, once again, the river is flowing, and the next generation that is coming, they are already taking this for, and it's their money.
Mm.
They are the next, and they are already taking everything that we've been talking about now. They take it for granted. That's the minimum expectation. So once again, even though it might be one step backwards, it's going to be 5 steps forwards going forward.
And sometimes you need those steps back to actually almost stress test a system.
Yeah, and fair enough. I'll probably get some criticism. I think maybe the pendulum's swung too strongly as well. The pendulum has been swinging backwards and forwards,
Mhm.
and yeah, and I'm 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 a believer in freedom as well. Like
Mm.
there's a side of capitalism where you have to be free. People need to innovate. People have to be able to take risk.
Mhm.
I know a lot of people perceive that as dangerous, and it is dangerous, but we need innovation. We need that risk taking. We take it for granted, but that's also very much part of the American soul,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not. And Europe has been, especially Sweden, we're a bit more social democrat. You know, we're really sort of responsible capitalism, nearly social capitalism. We're allowed to talk about that. And I'm sort of thinking, yeah, we probably need that mixture of the two. There needs to be a bit of dreaminess to it, a bit of forward looking, but then we can do it in a smart way and we can do that in a responsible way as well. I don't really see in the end that there are conflicting
Mm.
approaches. So yeah, it's one step backwards, but I'm still a believer that this is going to be fine. We keep pounding the message.
Excellent. And as you say, so much change and improvement has been made over the last 25 years. Where do you think we will be in 25 years' time from now?
I actually think electrification will go quite quickly.
Mhm.
I think the law of finance, the law of physics, solar is becoming so cheap. Batteries is falling so quickly. It will change the way we produce things.
Mhm.
It will move a lot of heavy industry out from where it is now into new areas. But that will also force us to rethink the need of much of that production, I think.
Yeah.
Because I do think something which is obviously a part of any environmentalist is the consumer society, and at the end of it, we can't get 10 billion people on this planet to replicate the way we've been living in the 20th century. I mean, the 21st century needs to look different from a consumer aspect, and I think many many in the new generation, the young they are completely aware of that.
Yeah.
And so they're I think the world is going to look very different, but we will need a lot of energy. I think looking at energy poverty and poverty in general, and how energy makes life so much richer and possibilities for freedom and what have you, we should encourage that. But it will have repercussions in terms of more mining,
Mhm.
and I think that it's going to be challenging. You and I know it's going to be challenging, but we need to be proactive about that.
Brilliant. So, final words. Stay sharp. The future is going to be a nice, happy, optimistic world, and we're going to get that positive change. Do you disagree?
I think we need to have that mindset. I'm not sure it's going to be like that. There's a lot of worrying signs, and we are all aware of that. But I think people like you and I, we need to stay sharp on that message, because otherwise we will be in a bad place.
So, thank you very much, John. Fantastic to speak with you.
My pleasure.
So, that was my conversation with John Howchin, and there is a huge amount to unpack from it. I think the first thing that really stayed with me is this idea of where power actually sits. We often talk about governments, about companies, about regulation, but what John highlights very clearly is that the institutional investment community effectively owns a significant portion of the corporate world. And that changes the way you think about responsibility. Because if the capital ultimately comes from all of us, from pensions, from savings, from long term investments, then in a sense, it isn't just about them, it's about us. And that reframing is incredibly powerful. The second thing I found fascinating is just how recent much of this progress actually is. When John talks about the late 1990s and early 2000s, when companies didn't track carbon, didn't have sustainability teams, and often pushed back quite strongly against these concepts, it's a useful reminder that what we now take for granted has been hard fought. Those roles, those systems, those expectations, they didn't just appear, they were built. And I think that leads to an important warning that comes through in what he says. Don't get complacent. Because while we've come a long way, we are still very much at the beginning. And this becomes particularly clear when we turn to raw materials. One of the most striking and perhaps uncomfortable points that John makes is the sheer scale of what is required. If we are serious about the change that we want to go through with regards to electrification, about the broader energy transition and everything else, then we are also talking about either changing the way in which we keep our materials in circulation and or opening potentially hundreds of new mines. And many of those new mines will be in places that are environmentally sensitive, socially complex, and politically challenging. So there's a tension here that we can't ignore. On the one hand, we have very real environmental and social concerns about mining. On the other, we have an equally real need for the materials that underpin our transition. And simply opposing mining altogether doesn't resolve that tension, it just pushes the problem somewhere else. That's where I think John's concept of responsible capitalism becomes particularly interesting. Not perfect, not idealized, but pragmatic. It recognizes that markets, capital, and industry are not going away, but that they can be shaped, influenced, and improved. And that brings us to one of the most practical parts of the conversation: what actually needs to change? The idea of a level playing field is key. At the moment, expectations are often highest for large listed companies, but much of the future development in mining will come from different organizations. And they may include smaller, earlier stage players or new entrants into the marketplace who don't always have the same resources, pressures, or understanding. So, how do we ensure that standards and, importantly, good practices are applied consistently across the board? And how do we support that? That's where the concept of patient capital comes in: investment that is willing to stay for the long term, to support better practices from the outset rather than expecting immediate or short term returns. I also found the discussion around simplification really compelling. There's often a tendency in this space to make things more and more complex, more frameworks, more standards, more reporting layers. But John's argument is almost the opposite. Start simple, get the right data, make sure it is good quality and where possible, standardize it, and build from the ground up. And that's quite a refreshing perspective because it shifts the focus back to action rather than process. Finally, I think there's something quite honest and quite human in the way John talks about the future. There's optimism here, but it's not blind optimism. It's an understanding that the system is huge, complex, and at times messy, that progress isn't linear, that there will be setbacks, political shifts, and competing pressures. But also a belief that the direction of travel is clear. The phrase he uses, stay sharp, feels like a good way to summarize it. Stay engaged, stay questioning, don't assume the job is done. Because if the last 25 years have been about building the foundations of responsible business, the next 25 are going to be about scaling it rapidly, globally, and under far greater pressure. And that's where conversations like this really matter, because they don't just highlight the challenges, they help us understand where the levers for change actually are. And that, ultimately, is what Responsible Raw Materials is here to explore. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.